Hey everyone, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Thanks for joining in. My name is Rakshit. I'm the head of marketing for Subex, and I'm going to be your host today for this wonderful talk session. I have with me two brilliant people who have a lot of good things to say about AI, and I'm sure you're going to have a good 60 minutes from here on. Uh, if you're in the telecom industry, and if you've somewhat followed AI so far, then I think my first guest does not need much of an introduction. His name is Aaron Boasman-Patel. He's the VP of Artificial Intelligence and Customer Experience at TM Forum. He's also responsible for setting up and leading the AI collaboration project for TM Forum. And I won't be wrong if I say that I'm yet to come across someone speak so passionately about AI as Aaron does. Aaron, welcome. Pleased to have you here.
Thank you so much, Rakshit. Really delighted to be here today.
Fantastic. Next, I have with me Rohit Maheshwari, who's the head of strategy and products at Subex. Rohit comes with over 20 years of experience in the telecoms industry, and his subject matter expertise runs deep. He's been very instrumental in envisioning and rolling out Subex's AI orchestration platform, Hypersense, and he has a great understanding of where and how AI fits in the context of the telecom industry. Rohit, welcome.
Thank you, Rakshit, and hello, everyone.
Fantastic. So just before we begin, a couple of quick housekeeping rules for everyone. For the benefit of everyone, to avoid any unintended disturbances, we'll keep all the audience attendees on mute throughout the course of the webinar. If you have any questions, which I'm sure you will given the talk we're having, please feel to drop them in the chat window, and we promise you will take them up towards the end of the session. Yeah. So with that, let us get this session started on how Telco Transformation begins with AI Democratization. Right. So Rohit, Aaron, I have one question that I want to particularly begin with. Right. So I think we all agree that AI has been spoken about so much to the point that we can almost say that it's been now abused from a marketing parlance. Anything you pick up, anything you see has a prefix of AI to it, right? And of course, there are reports of how telcos will spend over $30 billion in the next 3 years on AI investments, and there are reports pointing to some $15 trillion of value being derived from AI and all that. But I think one question that people like me, non-AI practitioners like me, would have is how much of this is hype and how much of this is actual reality, right? And it'd be great, Aaron, if you could answer this from a telecom standpoint, that'd get the session kickstarted.
Absolutely, Rakshit. Thank you so much. So as you know, I'm really passionate about AI, and I think there is a lot of hype surrounding it. There's no question about it. Where we're going now in the telco industry is really exciting. That's probably why we're starting to see these big figures, around 30 billion to be spent, trillions of dollars in extrapolated value. The fact is the telco is starting on that journey. And that's probably why we're talking about those investments, because it's not easy to deploy AI. Most deployments today in CSPs, I would argue, are not AI. It's very much around advanced analytics, in some cases starting to look at machine learning. But where we're really starting to drive the industry to now, and an area I spend a lot of time working on, and I can see it really happening, is particularly around end-to-end automation, driving autonomous networks, applying AI in your operations, and that is now really starting to come into fruition. And there are some domains more than others where it's really starting to come through. And I would say, just to give you that flavor, is service assurance is the area where most CSPs today are starting to deploy AI. So it is real, right. It is live, and it is in CSPs networks today.
Okay, fantastic. Rohit, do you concur? Yeah. Do you have contrarian views on that?
No, not at all. I think I totally agree with Aaron. In fact, I would like to look at how much of it is hype and how much of it is reality, maybe through the lens of some data, right? In fact, a majority of enterprise leaders now agree that they have adopted AI. McKinsey did a survey in 2021, and per that survey, 56% of enterprises today are leveraging AI. Not just adopted, they're already seeing impact on top line as well as reduction in cost. Further, more than a quarter of leaders acknowledge the impact of AI to be greater than 5% on EBIT, and this is only increasing. So for sure, AI is real. and telcos are in this journey, and I believe this is a sustained long-term journey. I also believe that besides automated service operations or network operations automation, like Aaron pointed out, other areas of interest are in areas of hyper personalization, in areas of new product design and product launch, in areas of customer experience management, and of course, risk management. So we are seeing emergence of leveraging AI in several of these use cases. Our own customers, Subex's own customers, have started leveraging it quite effectively.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true. But one point I want to pick on what Aaron said was, a lot of it is still advanced analytics, right? I mean, so one thought could be that are people sort of disguising advanced analytics as AI, and then in your McKinsey survey that you're talking about, do you see that as a probable case where it's been answered from that standpoint, or I'm just genuinely asking, right?
No, I mean, we are really talking about very pointed AI adoption, Rakshit.
Okay.
Not just advanced analytics, right? Of course, it's a fact that in many cases it is still in pilots or probably in pockets. Probably that's a better way of characterizing it. And pervasive across enterprise adoption is still lacking, and that's where all the value is still hidden.
Right.
I think one of the problems there, Rakshit, though, is about what do we mean by AI? How do we define it? What boundaries do we start to put into where something moves from advanced analytics to machine learning to AI? And you hear things around, autonomous. AI is quite fluid, and I think this is the challenge that the industry has, is really coming up with a defined definition to understand at what level of AI are we operating? And that's why at TM Forum, we came up with our 6 levels, of automation, because only if you understand where you're at and what decisions the AI is making can you understand at what level you're advancing, with the application of AI. So I think we've got to get much stricter as an industry to understand, are we using closed loops? Are we using intent? These types of things really take us from going from something that is quite rudimentary or maybe basic AI, depending on what your definition wants to be and how you define intelligence. That's always, it's a bit like doing an IQ test at school, and pushing through to really understanding who is making the decisions and where does the human sit within that loop. And I would question that's where we need to spend more time on defining that role of AI.
Right. And that's a good point, in terms of how you actually see what is the boundary for AI also sort of defines, what value it brings, right? But if you look at telecom as an industry, right, do you think it is, or rather, where do you think it is from an AI readiness standpoint? Because there are industries that are born in the cloud, that are born digital, right? Take fintech, for example. And I would assume these are the ones that are most conducive for AI, right? But given the nature of the telecom industry, where do you see the industry's readiness and the maturity to actually embrace AI to its fullest potential?
So I think for me, Rakshit, it's about understanding. There's 2 parts to that question when I get asked that one. And I think one is to understand what is the telco doing with it internally. And the second is what enterprise services can it offer externally using AI? And I think there's 2 very different questions there that can be used. So in terms of using internally, I think telco is starting to catch up, particularly, as I say, on things like service assurance. I think Rohit did a good looking at, things like next best offer, looking at the customer service, making sure you've got real time, those types of experiences. But the next stage where I think telco has to go and needs to mature as well is about how they can offer their AI to other industries. And that's where we talk about 700 billion of new growth that's going to be enabled by AI for a CSP. And that's particularly in the B2B2X space, which is so exciting, particularly around industrial automation. If it feels like, what use case do you think the telco can quickly do this? I think things around industrial automation. Think about food traceability, for example. But to do that, first of all, they've got to get their operations correct. And that becomes really, really critical. And I think we mustn't underestimate how hard it is to drive automation in your operations. But if you're going to offer true enterprise services, you have to have automation. If you think about, working in Industry 4.0, the SLAs are going to be different. If my internet goes down, yes, I get annoyed. And yes, I can tether from my phone and there's a way around it, right? If you're in industry and you've got millions of dollars being lost in terms of revenue due to an outage, that is where having 100% reliability on network becomes really, really critical. So telco is probably a little bit behind. than some other industries, but I think we're now starting to see a big momentum. And I've got a huge amount of admiration for a lot of people working in telco, because I think we're starting to see a big shift. And my final point on that is we're very hard on ourselves as an industry. When I go and talk to other industries, they always say, oh yeah, we're not as good as telco in this, so we're not doing as much as that. So sometimes we do need to step back. And as we have that expression, sometimes we can't see the wood for the trees, because we're so self-critical. Exactly. We need to step back and look at all of the amazing advancements that we've made and we continue to make.
Right. And you spoke about the telcos being the enablers for other industries, right? I mean, are you talking about telcos being ready to offer AI as a service to other industries? If you could, sort of clarify that.
Absolutely, and that's what this is all about. It's all about telcos going beyond connectivity. That's what we talk a lot about at TM Forum. And everybody's going through digital transformation. One of the things that's really sad is if you take a look at what happened during the COVID pandemic and look at shareholder return, things like retail, they saw their share prices go up by up to 50% because people will be able to go online and do shopping and continue to do that. Food, grocery stores went up. Telco only went up by about 3.5% in shareholder return. Yeah. It's terrible when you think that actually we powered the whole of this digital transformation. So a lot of that is now what we have to say is we have to take that technology and we have to resell it. We have to reserve it, because a lot of this is about people's impression of what we're doing. It's not always about the numbers on the bottom line. So I think absolutely, if you think about some really good case studies that telco can do, think about freight tracking and management. For anybody, in the United Kingdom, we left the European Union. That's caused us some problems with imports. Telcos are really open to be able to do food traceability, understanding, cargo, where is the right thing? COVID disrupted the world. We have the technology to do that, to use AI to drive things, like better, distribution channels. Think about, robotic automation, running factories. Telco can absolutely do that. It's operations, and it's all about that operations center of the future. So telco will fundamentally power these things. Think about oil rigs. Look at what Telus are doing in Canada, looking at how they can play a role in servicing oil pipelines to all the tundra in northern Canada. Really exciting things.
Yeah, that's great. So Rohit, see, if you look at AI adoption as a concept, right? So there are two parts. One is the readiness, which Aaron was talking about right now, and then there is the willingness to adopt, which is more to do with, say, the drivers for AI adoption. Right. So for telcos, what do you see as the primary drivers that are pushing them to? I mean, one, of course, with the assumption that they're reasonably ready and getting up pretty well towards that AI adoption. What is it that is pushing them from, say, a use case standpoint, be it on the profitability, growth, customer experience side?
I think,
what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, Rakshit. I think Aaron already pointed out network automation, and a lot of it is got to do with how everybody around telcos have become reliant on telco and service providers to provide that connectivity, right? It's taken for granted. So I think one of the things which telcos are constantly striving for is providing that great customer experience, that resilience in the network, making sure that the relevant amount of bandwidth at the right latency is constantly available. And in a way, when you look at it, I see it as telcos having to fight this battle with one hand tied back. Right. And the reason I say this is, the big tech that you earlier pointed out and Aaron pointed out are able to get away without having to actually invest in building these networks. Whereas telcos do end up having to, put in a lot of money in building out these networks. Right. True. And if you look at more than half the data traffic on telco networks is actually that belonging to the big tech. So that it's sort of unfair. But then again, telcos also have their leg up and the advantage in terms of having access to all this data, having access to all the customers, and like Aaron pointed out, being able to provide these services in a B2B2X context, right? I think that's where the real value lies in, right? Yeah, I think for telcos, it is a very, very exciting time to be in. And, most of the use cases, like I mentioned, network resilience, network automation, then of course customer experience. A lot of it is going to be around customer experience. And finally, remember, they're in business where they need to manage their costs, increase their profitability. So margin management, profitability management, product optimization, and risk management, security, fraud. I mean, these are some of the top 4 or 5 use cases where most of the efforts are being currently focused around.
Right.
And actually, just to build on what Rohit was saying, if you take a look at the latest TM Forum survey that we did, actually the number one reason that 75% CSP said it was to improve the customer experience. But then with that one, I always say you've got to look under the hood a little bit, because everything improves the customer experience. But I think what Rohit said really resonates with me in particular. It's about not only delivering new services and those customer experience, it's about delivering at the cost point that the market requires. And that is really, really critical. You can set up new business lines, you can do new services, but if you can't do the cost point the market requires, you're not going to see your ROI. And that bit is really, really important.
Right. I think that makes sense. So I'm going to put this thread on a slight pause, right? I mean, just to sort of draw our attention back onto the title of the discussion that we're having today, which is AI, Telco Transformation begins with AI Democratization, right? So can you take a minute and, just for everyone's benefit, sort of lay it out as to what we mean by AI Democratization?
Well, I see, when you look at AI, Rakshit, and when you look at people who have benefited the most from AI and compare it with others who are probably still working in the core of AI, trying to build ML models, trying to build AI, right? The difference between these two categories is, in my opinion, the former, the AI leaders, if you will, are the ones who are able to, not only think about designing AI-driven solutions, but also put them into deployment and then operate it very successfully. I think when you look at the whole life cycle, it is really about how you, essentially ensure from the very beginning you understand the entire life cycle. And life cycle management implies bringing business users on board, right? You're not going to get away by concentrating all the information on how to best use AI and data science only with the data scientists. So you need to bring users on board. Now, there are a few different dimensions to this structure, right? One needs to understand users have the best information on the nuances of a use case, right? The use case is actually very close to the users. And they are the ones who can help data scientists design the right kind of solutions, if you will, right? And from there, once data scientists have designed the AI models, it again falls back onto the ML engineers and the users to effectively use it, right? Which then again leads us into areas around, explainability, AI transparency, AI bias, AI trust. To me, democratization means, to your original question, to me, democratization means, can I get users, appreciate the value of AI? Can I get them participate in this effort to build out AI-driven solutions? Can I then ensure that AI-driven solutions are sustainable by making sure users are able to appreciate what exactly this black box of AI is really trying to do? I think that's very, very important, Rakshit. A final point on this question, Rakshit, is it is, while it's good to say at an operational level we try to cover all of this, a lot of mandate needs to come top down. So the leaders, the CXOs, definitely have a role to play, because they are the ones who are going to drive mandate around adoption of AI in the organization. They are the ones who are going to set long-term goals and then work backwards as to what needs to happen from the very beginning. And that again is an important dimension of democratization, Dr.
Right. So on that ownership part, Rohit, I'm going to come back to you, but I want to get Aaron's views, because he obviously speaks to telcos probably twice a day, right? So is this something that you're seeing as a prevalent concept, Aaron, in amongst telcos, to sort of summarizing what Rohit said, putting the power of AI into the hands of business users, right? So is that a direction that telcos are thinking what do you see as the trend within
No,
the industry?
absolutely, and I couldn't agree with Rohit more. And I think we just need to take it back a little bit, because democratization of AI means everybody has a say, everybody understands what it is, and that becomes so important. Now, that's important from a regulatory standpoint, because we need to understand what is happening in those black boxes. The fact is, vendors, operators, whoever's building those AI models are not going to give away that source code, right? That is the differentiator, what makes it. So people have to start to understand, what does it mean? What can we do with it? How do we apply it? But also, how do we manage it at scale? That becomes critical from a regulatory, from a trust, privacy, security, all those things that Rohit was just talking about. Now, CSPs are taking this very, very seriously for two reasons. And I run many collaboration groups, speak to hundreds of CSPs every single week. And a lot of the work we're doing in our AI governance is all about that. It's about democratizing AI. It's about making sure we have things like AI model data sheets, so that we can understand all of that data that's gone through the AI models. Now, democratization is really important in this one specific use case, because then people really start to understand, what do we mean by it?
Right.
If you think about collecting all of that data, that means you'd have to be a data scientist in theory to understand it. Thousands of lines of JSON, Turtle, schema, whatever what you want to use. But what we have to be able to do is translate that and democratize it. So anybody, whether you're working in HR, design, development, customer experience, whatever way, can understand what is happening on that AI. So things like model data sheets become very important, because it says, I want to know this about the AI model, and then you can compute and get the information out with answers, not just thousands of lines or tens of thousands of lines of JSON schema. So CSPs are taking this very, very seriously. There's a second point to this, which the first point is around that regulation and understanding. The second point is AI is very scary to a lot of people. People think, I'm going to lose my job. And people thinking about this is one of the biggest reasons why AI isn't implemented today, and people are scared of it. That's why democratization, understanding the power of it, becomes so important. How it can enable you to do your job better, more efficiently, because the AI is taking away a lot of the manual, repetitive tasks, and you can be empowered to do your job better and learn new skills. And I think that's why democratization is important, because if we're scared of it, we're never going to use it and use it to its full potential.
I think that's a very important point you brought up, Aaron. We often talk about democratization in the context of enabling them to do better, but not really about making them comfortable with AI, coexist with AI. I think that's a very important angle that you bring about. In the same breath, right? So, Rohit was talking about how it should be a top-down approach and top-down push. But who do you think is or should be responsible for democratizing AI within an organization? I mean, is it the CIO's charter? Is it the CTO, or should it be the business function heads that take the lead in ensuring that their functions are AI enabled? Who do you think should take the lead on that?
For me, it has to be the business functions head. This is what I mean by democratization. You can't have a centralized AI power, because you'll start having AI managing AI that manages the AI that manages the AI, and it gets very, very complex. And then nobody really understands an organizational level. And again, you don't have the flexity and the joy and the power that AI will bring if you start to constrain it. Think about data science. Data in a telco is so constrained, telcos can't have access to that real-time data. They can't understand what patterns are happening, in their network, because nobody wants to give anybody access to it, because they're scared of it. The same thing's going to happen with AI. We have this discussion, with data. Who owns data? Do we have a chief data officer? And different telcos are having different approaches. That's why I would say, yes, you've got to have true governance. Has to be an AI department that's governance overall, but AI has to sit with the different functional heads. Somebody working in finance isn't going to, who might use AI for financial modeling, for looking at predictability, isn't going to understand things like closed loop anomaly detection and resolution in an FTTX network. The same thing, they're not going to understand it for areas of next best offer. They're not going to understand it, in around base station cooling and these types of areas. So it has to go with those individual heads who are looking after it. Otherwise, you won't get the power of it at all.
Right. Rohit, you've got any views on that? I mean, do you think it still should be the business function heads that own it, or does it have to be centralized? You're on mute, Rohit. Sorry.
I did not realize I went on mute. Okay, so the way I see it, Rakshit, is hopefully that wasn't AI. So anyways, so the way I see it is definitely, while the mandates can be top down, the real adoption needs to happen at a business level, right? At a business leader, at a business organization level. And therefore, participation of all the stakeholders is super important. I think
Right.
just besides whose mandate it is, there are a couple of more points that we discussed which are important for success of AI. One is adoption of best practices, which we are already seeing emerge from the ones who have managed to get the best results, right? And therefore, I
Yeah.
was talking about ensuring the life cycle is well managed, ensuring MLOps is a key area of focus, ensuring governance is a key area of focus. And
Right.
finally, I mean, it's very, very important to recognize addressing the most important AI risks, right?
Okay.
There are risks, right? Aaron touched
Yeah. Of
upon them. There
course.
are risks. I mean, let's look at the most important AI risk, right? There is a cybersecurity risk. We saw
Right.
through the pandemic the number of cybersecurity attacks simply increase. And why
Yeah.
why AI in particular? Because when you're doing AI, you're also managing to collect massive amounts of data, and then
True.
then data is starting to get centralized as well as democratized. The risk, of course, is if you don't have the right data governance practice around it, the right cybersecurity practice around it, really private information is up there for and can become victim to cybersecurity attacks. Then, of
Right.
course, there is the regulatory risk, right? We
Of course.
know in some cases, in fact, I was reading somewhere of 300 odd regulations around the world, which are being proposed in the last 1 or 2 years around AI. A
Oh.
large majority are around trustworthiness and ethics of AI. So regulators are also taking a very, very serious risk, and managing regulatory expectations and instrumenting that into
Yeah.
practice is another important AI risk to manage. And finally, explainability, trust, user enablement that we already discussed about. I think
Yeah.
these are really important, besides where the mandate lies for AI to be successful, Rakshit.
Right. Right. Absolutely right. I'll come to the trust and transparency part because I have a special section for that in this, and I don't want that to be a passing comment in this conversation. I'll come to that, but we've discussed a lot of positive things so far with respect to AI, right? But I mean, uh, no one can deny the fact that there are a lot of hurdles and challenges in the current scenario for telcos to actually adopt AI, right? So, Saran, if I were to ask you to speak about some of these key impediments in their way that is preventing them from actually embracing AI, AI the way they can, what would those be?
Yeah, I think that there's a number of things. The first one has to be data.
Right, of course.
Having access data, and the key thing here to understand, synthetic data doesn't work with AI. So we have to get this
Right.
idea of synthetic data. Let's just remove that away. So as I always say, we talk about data being the new oil. Well, it's more than that. Data is the oxygen for AI. So
Right.
we've got to really understand AI cannot work without having access to real-time network data. And I'm seeing some positive signs of things around digital twins being set up to help come over some of that
Yeah.
simulation and use of the data. But I think access to data, as I say, data governance is a noose around operators' necks because they can't have access to it. I know many heads of enterprises in operators and chief architects who cannot have access to their own data. How on earth are they expected to implement design AI models on their network if they can't have access to their own network data? So that has to be number one. The second thing I think is skill set. I think operators are still struggling to attract the right talent to upskill people. So I think data skill set. A third one that we see time and time again, and people are always surprised by this one, and this comes from our TM Forum surveys, lack of senior management support. And it have to have senior management support to drive, AI. It's got to be top down as well as bottom up. That's where you see it's a cultural shift and a cultural change. Because with that, and there's that other point we've touched on is trust. There is a lot of nervousness, and this is probably why you don't get that senior membership engagement, is because how do we know what you're doing with AI is going to work? And people are scared of the regulators, and we have to understand how we can work better as an industry with regulators. So we still have the right controls in place, absolutely critical, and I'll never take that away, but we have to be able to experiment. We have to be able to adopt.
Right. Right. I think two specific points from that, Aaron, I want to discuss about. One is the skill set. Right. I think this is spoken about so widely, pretty much in any report that you read about, AI. I think one of the barriers to adoption is listed as skill set. Does that continue to still haunt the industry, or is it? I mean, simply a factor that was stated earlier and then gets carried on? Because there are various other things that probably, overshadow this? Or do you think that's a genuine problem? I mean, it could be finding data scientists or upskilling your existing business workforce, like you said earlier, to be comfortable with AI. Is that still that big a problem?
Yeah, it really is. I have the pleasure of going around to spend time and actually visit CSPs and talk to them and do workshops with them. And this is a real problem around skill sets. And there's a number of reasons why. And I think that's what we have to, it's no point, as you say, I think actually just saying there's a skill set problem, It's about diagnose and understand what it is.
Right.
I think the first is that there was a long time debate over how CSPs would create, use, or adopt AI. First of all, CSPs got very excited and said, we're going to do it all ourselves. We saw this huge thing saying we're going to do it all ourselves. That's starting to change now. We're starting to see CSPs be much more open and wanting to partner and actually use the expertise from vendors and the guys like you at Subex coming in to help them with it. So I think that will start to remove a lot of that skill set challenge, because CSPs are now saying, we can't do this alone. And I think it's a bit like those golden opportunities. They thought we want to keep this to ourselves. That's the first one. Yeah. The second one is, if you graduate from Berkeley or whatever, Oxford, whatever university in the world, people still have this idea that they want to work for Meta, they want to work for Google, they want to work for AWS. So some of that top talent does, unfortunately, naturally. So how do we make telco more attractive? Because we want that top talent. It's not just about getting the people who didn't get those jobs and come over to telco. We've got to make telco exciting. And I'm so excited about telco. It's the future. So how do we attract them? That's the second thing we have to diagnose. And the third big issue, which we have to talk about, is culture. We have to change telco culture. If you change the culture, then you can upskill. If you don't change the culture, you won't be able to get as many people through those programs as you need. So I think when you look at, yes, it is an issue, but I think it's about understanding roles, responsibilities, the vendor relationship, the CSP relationship. Changing and driving that culture is very, very important. Let's make us all attractive and want to work for us.
Right. I think it's a very valid point. And on the the executive buy-in that you said, the senior leadership, the other point you spoke about was trust. And I'll go back to the point because even Rohit was bringing up the concept of trust. So do you agree that an increased level of trust in AI would be directly lead to an increased adoption in AI?
For me, Rohit, go ahead. No, Rohit, go ahead.
Rakshit, I definitely believe, Rakshit, right? So as I was mentioning, trust happens to be among the top risks so far as AI adoption and AI value is concerned, right? And lack of business adoption because of limited trust, right? Now, you need to sit and decide whether you want to let this customer come into your network or not. Allow a customer to get that shiny new handset or not, based on, let's say, a model. You need to decide which parts of your network need to be lit up with higher bandwidth versus which parts of your network needs to be lit up with lower bandwidth. And all the time, you're trying to leverage data and AI to make these decisions. And unless AI can tell you why a certain decision is being proposed, it's very, very hard to trust it. Many times, remember, the decisions coming from the systems and data might be counterintuitive, right? And therefore, the trust gap is even higher, right? So that, to me, addressing trust gap in AI, it begins by being able to measure constantly through the life cycle, of what I'm getting to see from AI, and for AI explainability to be instrumented in every AI project. I think these are very, very important things. And the last part being business appreciation of what AI can do and what limits of AI are. So that user education is also the third most important to bridge the trust gap, Rakshit. Aaron?
No, completely agree. Not much to add. The only thing I was thinking when you were talking about that, Rohit, I was thinking it's a bit like banking the unbanked, and it's the same thing. It's quite a good analogy in my mind, anyway. When I was just listening to what you were saying, because when people don't trust banks, nobody will use banks. And we see this in a lot of high cash economies, or even 100 years ago in more advanced economies, people didn't want to use banks, they didn't want to use ATMs, they didn't want to use credit cards, right? Because cash was still king. But when people trusted banks, they saw that then regulation came in, and they understood that actually their money was protected. Then online banking boomed, right? And this is the thing. So when you trust it, it drives adoption, and trust is And this is what, it's internal trust. Can we trust it? Can we use it? But also the trust of the customer. And I think, from a customer perspective, AI, if you don't understand something, you can't trust it. This is the key thing. And we've got to do a better job of making, people understand what data we need, how we're going to use it, and make sure we use it, fairly and ethically. And once we bring that trust in, we're absolutely going to drive, the adoption of AI. But it does take time, and it does mean you've got to have clarity and some legislation around it so people feel comfortable. If you don't feel comfortable with somebody, you don't want to spend time with them. You don't want to use those services and equipment, and that's key. And an interesting one that was in the newspaper this week, was about, again, the old trusty phone, and was about FaceTime. And I didn't realize, there's a feature hidden in there that if I'm looking at a screen over here, my eyes will still look you in the face. That terrified people because they just didn't understand how it worked.
Yeah.
And that's where we have to now start to explain to people what we're doing in the industry, why it's important. And people don't understand that without AI, they can't have the services they want to use. So, and I always explain, imagine if you're a really great gamer and you're doing, and you're doing a competition, and you I don't know, one of these, I don't play computer games, but you see these people kind of like shooting each other or riding cars or whatever. Well, what about if because your internet connection was no good, you couldn't participate in that game and you lost? And people do this. This is where people have to, now if you explain it to a gamer like that, they go, now I know why I need AI on my network. We've got to start doing that.
Yeah. I think a lot of what Aaron is talking today points to the fact that AI is perhaps overwhelming for a majority of the people out there. And, adoption largely depends on making or including all of them in the AI adoption journey. I think that removes a lot of hurdles along the way, and trust being one of them. Right. Rohit, coincidentally, your team is working on, a TM Forum Catalyst specifically on measurement of trust in AI. Right. Do you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. I mean, we have been involved in this AI sustainability catalyst. It's under the sustainability catalyst programs, and we're doing this AI for Trust catalyst program with a number of other telcos and collaborating with other vendors. And our responsibility there is to identify how do you measure trust in
Right.
AI from design to deployment, right? How do you instrument AI so that you can transparently see, the results, right? And in fact, this catalyst was identified as an award-winning catalyst when we presented last year. And right now we are doing the phase 2 of the catalyst. Very, very excited about the work the team is doing. And I think it will go a long way in this challenge that we were discussing. How do you get industry to adopt and hence extract more value out of AI? So very proud of this catalyst. And of course, all of this is happening in collaboration with TMF. So yeah.
Great.
I'm very excited about it, Rohit. Thank you for participating. What my other roles is I run the Catalyst with TM Forum, so it's great to see people, because this is about innovation, and this is the part that I really love, is that experimentation, and that's what I think Subex is really bringing to that Catalyst and showing sustainability and that trust that you can put into that AI. It's such an important vehicle for doing out there and showing the market what can be done.
Great thoughts on that. So I'm gonna again pause this thread for a bit, because see, whenever I attend some of these webinars and sessions like this, right, what goes on in my mind, and I think I can confidently speak for majority of the audience who are listening to this, is a big part of what is being said is good theoretically, philosophically, and all that, right? But how much of it actually translates into on the ground work, right? So I may be putting you in a bit of a spot or not with this, but can you give specific examples of where telcos have been able to get success with AI, and of course on the flip side where they've failed as well? Could be due to various reasons, could be wrong use cases picked for AI, could be that they were ahead of time with the specific application, they went ahead with multiple reasons. But if you could give examples of both, I think that would really help.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some of my favorite ones that we can talk about, and mine is currently is Airtel in India. Where they've used AI to reduce, they call it their customer frustration levels to near zero with AI-driven operations. So the Indian market's very challenging for those people who are listening who know about it. Got the new entrants coming in. Airtel, has legacy infrastructure. They were coming up with the too many network outages. They weren't understanding what was happening on their network, and you can go on YouTube and look at it, and I ask people to do this. It's really fantastic. Is that they put out a video, and this is a customer saying that we will improve the customer experience, we will guarantee reliability, come back with us, give us a trust. Now they deployed AI in their operations, and they really did it particularly around a alert correlation. They managed to see 80% reduction in customer frustration levels. 99% of issues were solved within 24 hours, 80% within 2 hours. This fundamentally changed what they were doing by employing this, in service assurance. And that's why, I say to people, this is really, really, really critical. 90% accuracy, and nearly 100% accuracy in bills, because they couldn't bill accurately. That shows you one use case where when you deploy AI, into your network, overnight you can start seeing results come in, and that becomes really, really important to do it. That's on the network. That's on the network side. And I'll give you just a contrasting example. If you look at Vodafone and Toby, where they've got their chat assistant, Toby, again, really starting to make sure that when something's happening, they understand who you are. It's connected with your phone. They already know. You don't have to start entering your details. Really starting to change the way they engage with their customers. So one, again, is on that network layer, but another is on the customer side, and saying how you can start to use AI to bring, much better experiences. So there's plenty of very, very good use cases out there today.
Great. Thanks for those examples, Aaron. And I think this conversation would be incomplete if we didn't talk about the societal impact that AI could bring in, right? Because of course, beyond all the quantitative stuff that we can talk about, I think there's a huge societal impact angle to AI. Would either one of you want to take a stab at that?
Rakshit, absolutely. I mean, we saw this best illustrated during the pandemic, Rakshit, and how telcos were able to turn around rapidly and make sure networks were re-optimized, rejigged, to be available even as workforces started working virtually, moved away from CBD to let's say various parts of the country into the hinterland. So that was one very, very powerful reorganization which happened absolutely rapidly. And I think without AI, none of that would have been possible, right? Because a lot of these network changes obviously were run through AI-based simulations, and subsequently for resilience, like Aaron pointed out, a lot of work telcos like Airtel ensured. They did very strong alarm correlation, etc., predicted potential downtimes, invoked remediation actions, etc. Another very clear societal impact was in being able to during the course of pandemic allow telco data to be harnessed for tracing pandemic or movement of pandemic. In the early days, you must have read about a lot of these cases where predicting the movement of pandemic was leveraging a lot of telco data in combination with AI. So there are a number of use cases beyond this. I think in fact enabling access to telco services and microcredits is one of my most favorite use cases so far as societal impact is concerned, because it magically enables lifting of the absolutely bottom of pyramid subscribers, the unbanked people into mainstream financial markets. So I mean, these are
banking the unbanked,
some of them.
Aaron spoke.
Yeah, exactly.
Aaron, I was talking to Rohit about this a little earlier, right? So I came across an interesting infographic which showed what were the the key topics that CEOs spoke in the last quarter, and then they had different bubbles, the size of the bubbles indicating how many CEOs spoke about that. And one large bubble there, in fact, bigger than anything else, like your cloud or digital transformation, was energy, right? So I want to get your views on what is the role of AI in the context of energy. It could be uh, for energy conservation, or it could be on the other side of how energy efficient it is today to run AI operations.
No, absolutely, and this is where we're seeing a lot of use cases, particularly at the moment coming in, and energy prices. So there's two reasons. One is for green credentials, which people sometimes often like to dress things up as. But when we get really honest about it, it's about cost saving, because energy prices are absolutely huge. So some of the work that are being done is around energy saving in data centers, energy saving, using automation, autonomous networks to do that. Look at base station cooling in particular is important. Data center cooling. One CSP recently looked, and they understood that actually if they applied AI and automation to their networks, over 100 million kilowatts of power every single year could be saved. That is absolutely huge, and that Massive, is why and that is why really understanding the power of base station online energy saving, and then looking at the the data center, running all of that power becomes important, because people are, because they want to have service assurance, they, for every base station, think we need to have it on full power just in case somebody drives by and needs one of our services. That's not true. You can use AI to understand someone's driving pattern, understand where they start to go, leverage up and down when you're using that energy, and it will have a fundamental impact. So yes, it will absolutely save them millions and probably billions of dollars as an industry, doing that. But think about all the tons of carbon as well we're not going to put into, that's about 100 million kilowatts of power every year. You can power London or something, on that. So when you start to put it in terms of that context, a lot of CSPs now, we have talking of Catalyst, we have a Catalyst looking at greener network, using AI for greener networks. There's a Catalyst on that we're doing at TM Forum. We also have lots and lots of use cases available on our website, particularly on this. It's a very, very pressing issue today.
Great. All right. So we have a few questions coming up, and we have just about 11 minutes left. But before we end this, I want both of you to take 30 seconds and give me your 5-year prediction for AI in telecoms. Could be wild. Don't hold back. Don't hesitate. What do you think AI is going to enable for the telecoms industry in the next 5 years?
Aaron, let me go in first, if you're okay. So I believe, Rakshit, AI will definitely get all pervasive, right? So far as telcos are concerned, from network operations to CMOs, to CFOs, to every part of the telco network, to customer service, etc. You will see, far greater adoption of AI, and you will see a much larger number of telco leaders reporting positive impact of AI on EBIT, right? So today, if we are seeing, let's say, a quarter of telco leaders reporting that, in 5 years' time, there is no other way out, right? Because remember, competition for telcos is coming from new areas, including big tech, and big techs are bringing not only their ability to innovate at a faster pace, that culture of innovation, but also they are in a way enabling telcos by providing easy access to all of this technology, right? So with cloud transformation of telcos, combined with the access to some new age AI based platforms which enable no code, low code AI enablement, and then of course acceptance that there is a significant value to be extracted. I'm very, very positive about the impact it will have across the telco board.
Fantastic. And your turn on that.
I think Rohit hit the nail on the head. I think it's going to be all pervasive. I think the way we talk about AI is going to be very different in the next 10, 15 years, because just like the way, we talk about systems differently than we did years ago. When I first started talking telcos, all about IMS, SDP, and that kind of gets taken for granted, and it all moves away, and there's other types of technology. So I think where I think we'll move into much smarter use cases. So I think what Rohit said was very true. We'll be talking about edge. I think that'll be much more, and using AI at the edge becomes more pervasive for those types of use cases. So I think what we'll see is telcos transform internally, I think we'll see telcos in the next 10 to 15 years. We have a transform scale of automation. I'm predicting majority of telcos in the next 10 years will become level 3. And then they'll start to increase, up that level of automation. So what does that mean, in real terms? Well, the networks start to become self-healing. They start to understand what's going on to launch those new services. Then in the next 20 years, I think we start having what we call real intent driven. So humans sit on top of the loop, not within the loop.
Right. That's very interesting. And hopefully, fingers crossed, all of that is true, and we're not still debating whether or not telco should adopt AI 5 years from now. We'll play back this recording and
we can't be having that debate. If we're having that debate, I've not done my job well enough, that's for sure. Because I'm trying to evangelize the benefits and make sure we have standards to do it. So I don't think that'll be the debate. I think it'll be about how far they're progressing as opposed to do we have it.
I'm sure. I was just kidding. Right. So we have about 7 minutes left, Aaron, Rohit. We have some questions that's come in. I'll read out. So if we could quickly take turns answering this. The first one that's coming here in the chat is, can you please share some real business examples related to BSS applications?
I mean, customer onboarding journeys to fraud prediction at a BSS level, categorization of customer tickets into appropriate buckets, enabling faster resolution. Right. I mean, there are a number of use cases: onboarding, support, use cases around billing, use cases around fraud, use cases around predicting delinquency, AI being used to do credit early warning. So yeah, there are a number of use cases, Rakshit, which are focused on BSS, not really on the network alone.
Sure. I just hope that answers your question. Also, a shameless plug: we have a white paper specifically around the AI use cases for telco that talks about a lot of what Rohit just mentioned. So you can download that. All right. The next one I have is it says, have you ever encountered a use case wherein AI was used to combat disinformation and the prevalence of fake news and troll accounts in the internet, especially in social media?
Not for me personally. That's not where we work, in TM. I know lots of people, are starting to work on that, particularly the likes of Meta and Google. So I think that's not really the use cases that I personally come across. I don't know about you, Rohit, but that's not an area.
No, I think, and like you pointed out, and social media is a completely different domain. We don't work in it, but I'm sure it is in top of mind recall for Mark Zuckerberg and Parag and of course, with Elon Musk, I'm sure using AI to manage it. Yeah.
Okay. Another one I have here is, I think it is slightly related to the earlier one, but it says, what kind of AI use case can telcos adopt in customer onboarding for improving customer experience? Anything specific to customer onboarding, any particular use case?
Rakshit, we need to first understand what are those friction points in customer onboarding, right? And then one goes about constructing the right kind of use cases. And that's where principles of design thinking start playing a very, very important role. If I look at customer onboarding, right, I'll begin with most onboarding today has started to happen, let's say, online. Okay. And therefore, is my online app or the web store working very well? Right. And that becomes an AI ops use case, for example, right? Is there a potential outage? Is there an outage in an unknown nook of the app, which I don't realize, which one mar customer journey? Now, let's look at what happens subsequently. Now, customer makes an application, but then customer needs to be allowed to, buy that handset on credit for 2 years or contract for 2 years. The next point of friction is validating if this is a good customer or a bad customer, right? And many times these checks start introducing friction. Now, let's imagine you're collecting all the relevant information, you're leveraging AI to predict the worthiness of a customer, etc., and then making that decision that much more better. The idea is not to stop good customers, but the idea is to being able to identify and stop bad customers, right? And that's another point, and so on and so forth. I can think of 10 different examples when I start breaking the customer journey itself. Right? How do I ensure the bills being sent to the customer are accurate? How do I ensure every service that the customer has subscribed to is in fact enabled in the provisioning and billing even before customer attempts my first call, right? Is my product functioning right? Am I using data to stimulate these journeys, maybe hundreds and thousands of times before launching the product, right? And it's all about customer onboarding and customer journey.
True.
I hope that answers the question.
I hope it does. All right. Following up on that earlier BSS related question, I have a comment that has come through, which says billing and rating is a very important module of BSS and we often get issues. Can AI help reduce it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah. I mean, in the space of assurance, there are a number of use cases. I'm characterizing this as billing assurance as a space, right? There are a number of use cases, right?
Right.
When you look at traditional telco billing, the number of instances where changes were being introduced, the number of products that were being introduced were far fewer. And a lot of these products were telco to consumer or telco to enterprise, right? Today, the whole construct of a telco offering is rapidly changing, right? We are really talking about B2B2X, and we are also talking about hyper-personalization, right? In this situation, it's almost like a segment of one, and you are creating a product per customer basis. In such complex environment where you're creating products per customer basis and enabling this journey through a number of onboarded business partners, imagine the chances of billing errors, right? And how do you overcome this, right? And is it even humanly possible to spot all these differences in, build versus actual? To be build versus actual, product design versus actual. And that's where leveraging AI to detect anomalies, to group these anomalies, and then leverage AI to zero in on the real issues starts becoming very, very important for quick resolution, Rakshit.
Right.
And I'm sure we can talk. I mean, whoever raised the question, I'm not able to see the person who has raised the question, but feel free to get back to us, and we'll be more than happy to get into a really detailed, conversation on how to leverage AI and ML in billing assurance.
Sure, I'll let them know that. Aaron, we probably have one last question. I mean, time for one last question. I have at least 5 more listed here, but we'll respond to them over email. How big is the risk of AI model solutions that are biased?
It's a very, very big risk, and that's one that we should never, ever underestimate. And that's why we really have to take, bias management important. At TM Forum, we've got the AI Ops framework. We actually have a specific process we're currently designing around bias to make sure that we look at it. But it goes back to the earlier discussion that we had. This is why getting access to the data becomes very, very important. So you can start to look at it, you can train it, and remember, retrain it. It's got to constantly be used. And my final thing, I know we're running out of time, but we have to understand, what do we mean by bias? My biggest worry is when we talk about telco, we always think about bias in terms of humans. Is somebody, religion, whatever, race, different things. Bias is much larger than that. Think about using AI for looking at the cabinet or doing base stations. If one company uses green, why another company uses red, you get bias becomes very, very easy in terms of fixing equipment as well. So I always say, but when you think about bias in AI, don't just think about humans, think about specifically for the use case, because bias creeps in absolutely everywhere. And just look at the best one I say to people is, there's a cancer hospital that was looking, one hospital used red tags, one used green tags, and it started to go on the color of the tags, not on the size of the tumor. So that's why bias then becomes very, very important to look at.
Yeah. Fantastic. Unfortunately, we're out of time, Aaron, Rohit. I mean, like I said, we have a few more questions. We'll answer them over email. But thanks a lot for taking time out. I for sure had a wonderful time speaking with you both in this, and I can confidently say that I go back with a little more knowledge than I had 60 minutes ago. And I'm sure that's the case with many of the attendees here. So once again, thank you for taking time out to do this. I sure hope we can spend more time doing a few more sessions like this in the future.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rakshit, and thank you, Aaron.
Thanks everyone who joined. I hope you found it useful. Have a good day ahead. Bye.